I understand people are saying this is a big challenge, especially for a guy that never managed at the big league level. I understand the city of New York. I've been here for the past 6 years, and I know how passionate the fan base is and the expectations that they got here. Just know that I understand, and I am ready for this challenge. I see this as a great opportunity. This is a great opportunity for not only Carlos Mendoza, but for the New York Mets.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel if you want to watch every episode, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo, and we have a lot to get into today. Obviously, we are recording this after the Carlos Mendoza intro press conference. A ton of talk around the offseason across baseball, but also for the Mets. Jeremy Hefner back as pitching coach. We're going to answer mailbag questions, Joe, as people just attack your mentions about the Rule 5 draft. So much to do. But before we get into any of that, how are you, man? I feel like this is often the beginning of your favorite time of the baseball season, which is not a season at all.
We're right up against it. The offseason's just getting kicked into high gear. Obviously, as we record here, when you listen to this on Wednesday or whenever you listen to it, you'll already know who the Mets added to the 40-man roster to protect against the Rule 5. We have the non-tender deadline coming on Friday at the end of the week. So there's things coming up right before Thanksgiving, and then before you know it, we'll be at the winter meetings and things will be going 100 miles an hour.
And an additional reminder that the Mets Pod will once again be part of the lineup at this year's Queens Baseball Convention presented by SNY. We obviously loved doing this last year. It was great to see so many of you and meet so many of you out at the event, and appreciate those that stopped by at our panel. And if you missed it, here's your chance. We'll be doing a live episode at the QBC on Saturday, December 2nd at the 4 Points by Sheridan in Flushing. Will be one of several panels alongside a baseball night in New York panel and an autograph and Q&A sessions with special guests Billy Wagner, Cliff Floyd, Terry Collins. Pretty solid lineup for all the Mets fans out there. Tickets are on sale now. For more information and to purchase those tickets, visit queensbaseballconvention.com. That's all you have to do. All right, Joe, let's jump right into it. The Mets introduced Carlos Mendoza. I don't want to say to the world this week. That's kind of a funny thing to say for a guy that's been on a MLB staff, the Yankees staff, obviously still a high-profile organization, but it felt so mysterious, a lot of this hire. I think part of it was, as we talked about, the Mets fans had Craig Counsell's name beaten into their brains for weeks. They weren't given a lot of other candidates in the rumor mill. And then it felt like we had a 24, maybe maximum 36-hour span of Carlos Mendoza heating up and crossing the finish line and being the Mets' new manager. So, listen, we joked about this off the air. It often feels like, you can lose a press conference, but how much can you really, really do to win it? What does it really, really mean? And I want your thoughts in full here, Joe. But overall, I thought a good showing for Carlos Mendoza, an easy guy to root for, a competent guy, a well-spoken guy. He's been on the podium in front of the New York media before. Like we've said before, he's finished games for Aaron Boone being thrown out of them. He has some experience managing, especially more notably at the minor league level. This is a guy that, in my opinion, understands what baseball in New York City is like, what it means, the intensity of it. This is when things are going well for the two teams in New York. This is a baseball town. I mean, we know that. It's just things need to be going well, and I think he has a good grasp of that. So what did you think of Mendoza today in front of the New York media, in front of the New York Mets fans?
When you mentioned Craig Counsell, that just, this is going to be the last time we talk about Craig Counsell probably anytime soon on this show. But when the Mets were going after Craig Counsell, it was a lot of, for the right price, he'll go to New York. And that led to a lot of Mets fans saying, well, if he doesn't want this job, I don't want him anyway. And I think I pushed back at the time thinking, whatever, he wants the most money, good for him. Hire him if he's the best person for the job. Now I kind of get where Mets fans were coming from, because Carlos Mendoza came across on this press conference as someone that really wanted this job.
Yeah.
He was passionate about it. He was an emotional guy. He absolutely controlled the room, which, like you said, Connor, ultimately winning press conferences, it doesn't actually mean anything in the scheme of how good he's going to be as a manager.
They don't go in the standings.
No, they do not. With that said, he absolutely had control of that room. It didn't seem like he wasn't reading like a script that he wrote down to talk about things. Like, this is a guy that he went up there and it seemed that he spoke from the heart, and you could see his bilingual is going to help, obviously, with some of the Spanish-speaking players on the team. His experiences, he spoke to experiences dating back to the mid-'90s, to Venezuelan Winter League, to everything, his family. He came across incredibly likable, incredibly confident, and someone that, while we won't know how a first-time manager will do until he's officially a first-time manager and managing baseball games, he came across as a guy that this was not too big of a thing for him, because it is a lot, the pomp and circumstance of a press conference for a manager in New York. There's always a lot of media following the Mets, but there's a little extra layer of it for an event such as this. So to me, he came off really, really well, and I'm excited to see and hear, from him more.
Me too. I think that, once again, the lights, don't seem too bright for him, and you got to play games to really know when the pressure is on. Joe and I are blind to these things. Like, right? We've covered now enough managerial eras in the Mets to know.
Sad.
Yeah.
Too many.
And GMs, right? Think of that's what's crazy. You and I, we haven't been podcasting about the Mets for like 10 years. It's not like that, but it's a matter of, we've covered a lot of different hirings, and we've covered an ownership change and things like that. And there are certain things you can start to talk yourself into, and there can be certain fears that are always in the back of your mind. But the reality is, going back to our last week's episode, you trust David Stearns to make the hire. I think, Joe, too, something that maybe isn't being talked about enough is that Stearns really did go outside the box here. I mean, this is not somebody that he's worked with in that capacity. This is not somebody that it's not like a lot of guys, right? And this is across all sports. It's really a huge problem in football. And I'm sure for them, and I shouldn't say problem, it's just a thing that exists. It can be a problem. They go somewhere and they're at the top of the hierarchy, and they surround themselves with a lot of comfort food, right? A lot of comfort employees, guys that they know, might not challenge them to a degree or anything like that. And it can be hard going somewhere and hiring guys that there's a higher risk factor, but there's also that reward factor. And that was part of this hire to me, where Stearns went a little bit outside the box. This is somebody that clearly was going to be the manager of a major league team. If not the Mets this offseason, Joe, I really do buy in. It was going to be somebody this offseason if he wanted one of those jobs, but he gets to stay in New York. And I think the other thing from this presser is how important it was to Mendoza. And you brought up his player relations, a guy that has experience coaching for Venezuela. But it was really cool that his parents came from Venezuela to be at the presser today. Just a really nice side note, how important this moment was to him. And he understood the importance of it, for the Mets and where their future is going. But player relations, almost every week on this podcast and across all baseball media, talk about how the role of manager has become diminished in this era of baseball. And it's not that it's not important, but it's become diminished, the impact. One of the things that will always be very, very important, right at the top of importance of this job, is player relations and establishing a clubhouse and maintaining a clubhouse and building a winning environment, an environment that is the team, not the me. And I think hearing that Mendoza already talked to Lindor, that's not a surprise. Lindor's, you could argue the face of the franchise right now, and a guy that's very open to those kinds of things. You look at the relationship he had with Buck, but Pete Alonso, who is not very far away from free agency. This relationship matters a lot right now for Pete Alonso and the Mets. And Mendoza's a guy that made the effort, and it seems like they had a long conversation. Edwin Diaz, Brandon Nimmo. That is something that this guy's got his first managerial job, his head spinning. There's so much going on. He's got this press conference. But the fact that player relations, especially some of the most important Mets for the short term and long term, were top of mind to him to get on the phone with them, that to me is a really, really important sign of a guy that understands a baseball clubhouse.
It is one of the most important things that a manager is going to do, is to build that culture. He used the word culture a lot, like build that culture of what the Mets are going to be. The attention to detail is something that's very important to him. And the player relations, he's by all accounts an approachable guy. I've read articles from Andy Martino here at SNY, read in The Athletic. Like, he's the kind of guy that is, door is always open. Anyone could come in and talk to him at any time. So the fact that he's already reached out to some of the star players, and his conversation that he had with Steve Gelbs, where he talked about the conversation that he had with Pete Alonso, he was like, we were on the phone for like 45 minutes, and I felt like I could have done hours with him. So clearly, I think there's a budding connection between Pete Alonso and Carlos Mendoza. And what a manager really needs to do is keep a locker room intact, keep guys motivated for the day in, day out grind that is a baseball season. And that's honestly, throughout the regular season, probably the top priority and job of a manager, is keeping the culture together. You obviously have to, monitor rest. You have to monitor what relievers get days off on certain days. Where the manager will make their money is in the playoffs. And the Mets got to get there. And once the Mets get there, we'll be able to make a true judgment on Carlos Mendoza's ability to manage in those situations. But by all accounts, it seems like he's the right guy to bring in at this time to build up a new culture, because the Mets are going through a transition, not in the sense of 2024 is a transitional year where they're not trying to win a World Series, but they're transitioning into younger players getting on the roster. Francisco Alvarez is, a core piece of this team. Ronnie Mauricio showed some things down the stretch. I don't think the Mets are giving up on Brett Beatty quite yet. And then we talk about the other prospects coming down the pikes. So it's going to be an infusion of youth in the next 12 to 24 months in the Mets organization. And it's going to be very important that Mendoza can balance the veteran players on the team and the young players on the team, and making them a team and not just a group of 26 individuals.
And I think the experience as a bench coach, that's a huge part of that, right? Is keeping your finger on the pulse of that. And it's going to be a big challenge for him, but it's something that you could sit here and say he doesn't have experience being a manager at the major league level, but he absolutely has experience at managing people at the major league level, professional athletes at the major league level of all ages and talent levels. I want to move over to David Stearns today a little bit, Joe. And this was the quote that stuck out to me. He had so many great things to say about Mendoza, but this is the one that I looked at. He said, I've talked about before how big these jobs are. We ask our manager to communicate with a wide swath of people, from the clubhouse to the front office, with the media to ownership. Carlos has those communication skills. He has the leadership ability, and I'm thrilled to get to partner with him and have him here with the Mets. The two things for me there is, one, I don't know what to make of the rumors last year. I think it's safe to say at some point there was probably a disconnect between Buck and the front office with the team. I mean, there's no point of going back down that road right now, but I think it's important that in this day and age, with so much information, with so much player movement, whether it's young players coming up from your system to help you or acquisitions in this era, that the communication between a manager and the front office and ownership, because Steve Cohen is in this thing, right? It's his checks, and he's a guy that cares enough that he's involved. That can't be an issue. It's vital. It needs to be a partnership. It's not you listen to me or I listen to you, or this is us talking through things. Is there a guy in AAA right now that we can take the chance and get him up here and see if he gives us a spark? Is there a guy out there at the deadline that you're seeing is the missing piece in this clubhouse right now? Is there something we could change in the lineup? I think that, we've gone through a lot of different GMs, as we joked in the beginning of the pod. And quite frankly, more often than not, when they spoke, I got zero information from GM media appearances with the Mets for a really long time. When David Stearns speaks, I actually can pull things out. And it's not him giving away the ingredients to the recipe they're trying to build here. It's just honest answers of what makes a successful organization in this era of baseball. And I think that connection right away between him and Mendoza is one that jumped out to me.
And it's going to be very important going forward. And I think we always talk about collaboration and working together. Like those are the buzzwords, right? And I think often fans take collaboration out of context and take it as, well, collaboration means I'm going to tell you what to do, Carlos, and I'm David Stearns, and I'm going to make the lineups. Another quote that David Stearns had, I think it might have been in one of the side sessions. He said, I wouldn't be a good big league manager, so I'm not going to try to be a good big league manager. But certainly he's going to have input, and he should have input. And, you know, he even said, I think back at the GM meetings, that he would hope there be a manager that challenges him. He goes, I think that's what makes baseball fun, is the challenge. So I think they already have hit it off to the degree that David Stearns offered him the job and really honed in on Carlos Mendoza being, let's be honest, his first ever managerial hire. People forget that David Stearns inherited Craig Counsell. He didn't pick Craig Counsell. They obviously worked out well together, but this is the first opportunity of David Stearns' career to pick the person he wants to work with. And you mentioned it before, Connor, that he has no prior experience with Carlos Mendoza. And, you know, you have to credit Mendoza for winning over in the interview process, kind of the old school way of getting a job, earning the job through the process, and not just because you were friends with the GM prior. So David Stearns comes off super genuine so far. And for a guy that really didn't deal with a ton of media in Milwaukee, he looks perfectly comfortable talking in front of the New York media. So, so far so good on the David Stearns front. And I think we need to consider that collaboration, I think, actually means working together, despite, you know, maybe people questioning that being valid.
So while Mendoza's the head guy, he's going to need a staff, right? And the good news is, depending on how you feel, maybe this is not great news to everyone. I know you and I are big fans of Jeremy Hefner. He will be back as the pitching coach. One thing I want to say, Joe, because I know there are some people that are down on Hefner, even though he's highly regarded around all baseball. Who failed the Mets in their starting rotation last year? The answer is undoubtedly Max Scherzer, and partially because he was hurt, but still reality, Justin Verlander, right? So what is Jeremy Hefner, who's younger than them, telling those guys? They have done enough where they're not looking at a pitching coach all the time to reinvent who they are. Kodai Senga came over here, and we knew how high Hefner was on that acquisition. I remember after they got him, you know, him speaking to him. I look at this and go, I'm not saying Hefner's perfect, but I'm saying blaming the Mets pitching struggles last year on Hefner to me is a bit short-sighted and the wrong way to look at this. And I think this is good news that there is some stability coming back with the staff in the mold of Hefner, who I think understands working with young pitchers and the fact that you're not, I don't know if there was an upgrade in terms of replacing him.
I don't know how you would get better. That's one thing for sure. I think what's important about Jeremy Hefner is I think a lot of fans are like, look how David Peterson got worse. Look how Tyler McGill got worse.
What, a torn labrum?
Yeah.
Peterson now, we find out, by the way?
Yeah, in his hip.
Kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal. But that's Jeremy Hefner's fault. And while I understand from the fan base perspective, they concern themselves just with the fact that he is the big league pitching coach. But Jeremy Hefner means a lot more to the Mets organization than just being the big league pitching coach. He was instrumental in hiring Eric Yagers to run player development on the pitching side. And they work hand in hand. Jeremy Hefner is involved even at the minor league level with talking about things with the analytics team and with Eric and the different people in player development. So Jeremy Hefner has a huge stamp on this organization. And what does it say about the quality of coach that he is? He just keeps making it through regimes. How many managers have we gone through? How many GMs have we gone through here talking about it on this show? Like, they just keep going through these executives and managers, and Jeremy Hefner keeps making it through. I think that just shows the quality of coach that he can be. And I've also pushed back on people. Pitching went really, really well in 2022, didn't it? And is that a credit to Jeremy Hefner, or is it just the pitchers were good, so whatever to Jeremy Hefner? But if the pitchers are bad, then that's Jeremy Hefner's fault. So I think you got to take it both ways. If you want to cast some blame on him for 2023, perfectly fine, and respect you to do that. But also give him credit for how great things went on the pitching side in 2022. So very happy that Jeremy Hefner's staying in the fold. I think the continuity that you said is very important. And I think his overarching organizational impact is something that maybe fans don't see right now, but we'll see as we move forward here over the next year, 2, 3, etc.
One more note here. Obviously, a big hire for Mendoza will be the bench coach, and it'll be interesting to see if he and the Mets prioritize getting a bench coach that has major league experience as a manager, maybe kind of that guy in his ear of, hey, I've been in your shoes before, do this, or this might help, or, once again, there's a lot of layers to this. If you get ejected from a game, the bench coach takes over. If you get suspended, the bench coach takes over. One nugget that's, kind of floating around right now, it's so interesting, is Mendoza's relationship with Willie Randolph from their time with the Yankees, Joe. And it seems like we can't completely rule out the idea of Willie Randolph returning to the Mets dugout, which would be not only a really, really nice story, but somebody with that kind of baseball experience in New York City, and Mendoza has it, but not at the highest level yet, is intriguing to me. Even for somebody that, is 69 years old now, it would be quite the return for Willie Randolph.
All due respect to Willie Randolph, but I'm pretty sure the last time he was involved in a pertinent coaching role in the major leagues was 2011.
Yeah, that's over 10 years ago.
I was not able to legally rent a car the last time Willie Randolph was a part of a coaching staff at the big league level. So all due respect, he was fantastic for the Mets in the mid 2000s before obviously everything that fell apart there. I thought he did a good job. I'm hoping that they're going to hire someone that's a little more current. I do believe having former managerial experience is a benefit. Do I think it's a necessity? No, I don't think it has to be. But I think it would be ideal if you could find someone. And when I say more current, I don't mean it has to be someone that's 35 years old, 40 years old. It's not an age thing. It's Willie Randolph is over a decade removed from the game. Is he able to relate present day and provide the necessary positive advice on a day in, day out basis? Is Willie Randolph better off being Carlos Mendoza's mentor that he talks to on the side? Maybe that is better off for him. But we'll see how this goes over the next couple of weeks. I imagine he has a list of people, and maybe Willie Randolph is on it, and maybe they'll hire him, and my mind can change. But where I stand today, I don't think hiring Willie Randolph, as nice of a story as it would be to bring him back after how everything fell apart, I don't think that's necessarily the best fit for the Mets present day and going forward.
No, I totally get you. It was an interesting thing out there, their relationship, and
he smiled when they asked about it.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be floored if this becomes a thing.
I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't think that's the direction the Mets should go.
And it can be tough to get recent managers in there. We saw today David Ross reportedly rejected working on Aaron Boone's staff because Ross has a year left on his contract that he was fired from. And, if he's going to come right back into the league rather than taking a year off, it sounds like he's hoping for a managerial position at some point. Obviously, those are quickly being swept up. I feel bad for David Ross. I really do. Not to go down that road, but, that's why when you think of names like that might make sense for this role, well, it might not make sense for the individual itself. So, this, of course, is the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. All right, enough, Joe. Let's get the offseason started. We've been absolutely grinding our teeth for this, and now we can really sit back. David Stearns is here. Carlos Mendoza is here. Jeremy Hefner is back. It's almost time to actually talk about player moves, acquisitions. Before we get back into, Yamamoto, Ohtani, all of these big names, what's next right now for the Mets? Joe, we kind of go down the checklist each week, and more things are being checked off before actual player acquisition. So if you're sitting in the Mets HQ today, what is the next big item of business for them?
So as we recorded 25 minutes, I have to submit my additions to the 40-man roster to protect from the Rule 5 draft. So that's number one. Number two is on Friday, I have to declare who I am tendering or non-tendering from arbitration-eligible players. So that's, David Peterson, that's Joey Lucchesi, a slew of relievers, Daniel Vogelback, Luis Guillorme. So there's a list of players that the Mets need to make a decision on by Friday. And then at that point, it's fill out the rest of the coaching staff, which I think chances are they have a good feel for who they're going to hire for most jobs and who's going to stay. Because very often when you see, like when Ron Washington got the Angels job, like right away, you kind of figure out who his staff was going to be. So I imagine that is not far behind. And then you put all of that stuff in the rearview mirror and you get ready to address free agency, address trades, constantly monitor the waiver wire, which is something that David Stearns did a lot in Milwaukee that I hope carries over here to New York. I think I would like him to do everything he did in Milwaukee well, and then you have a big checkbook when the time is right to write one. You have an owner willing to do it. So that's kind of the blend of the best of two worlds. But right now there's things that maybe the general fan doesn't care about, like Rule 5 draft and stuff like that. But we are we are very quickly approaching time when things are going to start moving. We're going to talk about Ohtani, and maybe I'll lead you into that discussion. But Jeff Passan wrote an article for ESPN talking about Ohtani and some of his preferences and things like that. And he said there's sources that think he might sign before the winter meetings that start December 4th. So before you know it, we're about to be in a world where major things are happening. All it takes is that first domino to fall, and then you see the rest of the league react and other moves transpire.
Yeah, so let's go there. I think with Ohtani, I saw the fear factor put out about the Braves being thrown to him. And then I actually watched all of Morosi's long rant and information on it. And it was basically that they are a good example of how interested he is in going to a place that has a capable roster. The Braves on their own pathway they need to get pitching. I mean, we saw what happened with that pitching staff and the injuries that they have going into next year. But I think the Dodgers are still the favorite. I wonder, this is what I wonder, Joe. If you're the Mets and the Mets have really good information. They have David Stearns now on top of all this. This is a man that has a lot of good information around baseball. And that's a huge part of the job, being I know he's the president of their baseball operations, but really what a GM does. I mean, how even in are you on this situation? Because you don't want to be used right now and you want to prioritize, and we'll get to Yamamoto in just a second, don't you worry. If it seems like there's just no way he's coming to the Mets, why even allow yourself to be used for leverage at this point? The Mets aren't in this situation, right? I think back to many, many years ago when LeBron was going through his first real free agency. And I remember being from New York, and as a Knicks fan, the Knicks were in a position where it was like, it didn't matter if internally or externally, nobody thought LeBron was going to the Knicks. You had to try everything possible because you really had no hope anywhere else. It was, okay, we got to get LeBron, and if we don't, well, this really stinks. I don't look at the Mets like this with Ohtani. The Mets, even if they don't trade for him this offseason, when Juan Soto gets to free agency, the Mets are probably going to be the favorite to land Juan Soto. The Mets are one of the favorites right now to land the best free agent pitcher this year in Yamamoto. The Mets, with their financial power and the direction Steve Cohen has taken the franchise, can look at the top solutions every single offseason. And there are big solutions every single offseason in baseball. So I'm not sticking my nose up and saying I'm too good to pursue Shohei Ohtani. That's not what I'm saying. But Joe, my nuts where if you get the feel internally, if you're the Mets, you're not really in this, why waste your time or allow yourself to even be played like that?
I 100% see where you're coming from. And the Mets need to balance how they're going to address free agency on a year in, year out basis. David Stearns has now said on more than one occasion, we're not going to get the top free agents every year. There's going to be years that we don't.
No one can operate that way.
You can only manage so many big contracts. Francisco Lindor has $341 million. Brandon Nimmo's north of $160 million. Diaz is north of $100 million. Oh, you want Yamamoto too, right? Like, okay, there's $200 million. You want Pete Alonso back? All right, there's another $200 million. You want Juan Soto? There's $400 million. Now you want Ohtani at $5. Like, these things can't keep going on top of each other. Obviously, Shohei Ohtani is a one-of-one player in baseball history, and it would be a disservice if the Mets didn't meet with him and get a feel for if he's interested in coming to Queens. But man, I see so much risk in the baseball investment of Shohei Ohtani. Don't get me wrong. If the Mets sign Shohei Ohtani, we're going to throw an emergency podcast and we're going to celebrate because and Steve Cohen and the Mets will make oodles of money on Shohei Ohtani. So from the business side of things, it's an absolute win. And in the short term for baseball, massive win. You're getting one of the best hitters in baseball. I wonder how much longer Shohei Ohtani is going to pitch, period. And he's going on a second elbow surgery, which obviously the success rate takes a big dip. And if he's not a starting pitcher, is he a reliever? And he's such a regimented guy. Is he the type of guy that's DHing and then it's the seventh inning of a game in June and they're like, hey, Shohei, go warm up? Like, is that something he could do on a spur of the moment thing? Or is it, hey, Shohei, you're pitching on Tuesday and Friday this week out of the bullpen, so just be ready on those days. So there's a lot of things that go into the Shohei Ohtani thing. And the reality is none of us know how this is going to work as he ages because there is nothing prior to go off. Right. And if he's going to end up one day just being a designated hitter, which is a distinct possibility, I think anyone ignoring it is misguided. And if that's the case, as great of a hitter as he is, and he is an otherworldly hitter, $50 million a year into early 40s for a designated hitter does not seem like the best allocation of funds for a baseball team. But it's also not my money. So if they want to sign Shohei Ohtani, I'm going to enjoy the heck out of his 50 home runs that he hits for the Mets in 2024.
But even to that show, he's never done that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I don't want this to be once again, Ohtani is awesome. With baseball, I can't say this all the time, although I've become this way more as I get older. I am now a fan of just players from other teams. Like for me, always, it was the Mets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Like it's just all about the Mets. But there are some guys, especially in this youth movement of the game, that you come up and you're like, man, I just want to watch this guy play. He's different. And Ohtani, of course, fits that billing. He's must-watch TV. But I do think you perfectly laid it out. You don't pay for, and this is what these smart people are paid to figure out. You don't pay for the unique feats he's already done. You're paying for what's going forward. And $50 million a year, which I hope Ohtani gets that. Good for him. If he's not an ace and one of the better power threats in baseball, that's a lot of money on your books right there. I mean, we said this, I think we know we've done this exercise once. Think of a $30 million player and a $20 million player and what that can do for your roster. And then think of Ohtani if he doesn't ever find his footing as an ace level starter again. It's one of those things where you try to take the emotion out of it because Ohtani in Queens would be unbelievable. Nobody is denying that. But the Mets don't need to find themselves in this desperation race if they truly don't exist in it anyway. So we're not putting Ohtani away until anything happens. But I think, and it's been this way on this podcast for a long, long time, I feel like you and I, in more recent years or year or two, have really followed baseball overseas and the guys that are coming over here because the Mets with Cohen are a more international spending team. It started with Senga, but that wasn't a one-off. This is going to be a trend for the Mets. The Yamamoto sweepstakes are going to be unbelievable because you're looking at a guy that really hasn't even entered his prime yet as a pitcher, and he's hitting free agency. So everybody's going to be involved in, or most teams are going to be involved in trying to get a 25-year-old that projects as a frontline starter. And this is the one to me, Joe, that the Mets will push all the chips in the table. It's not a guarantee that they get him. He might prefer a different destination. I don't know if anybody will offer the same amount of money as the Mets in this one, but this one to me is worth getting excited for and invested in the chase of.
The key is age. You mentioned it, Connor. When we talk about Shohei Ohtani, 30 years old. So you're buying the end of his prime and then into his aging seasons. Juan Soto, you mentioned maybe if he's a free agent next season, the Mets would pursue him. Guess how old Juan Soto will be next year?
At
25.
Least 25. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Soto was like a successful 19-year-old.
Yeah, like he's very unique in that
Unicorn.
sense.
Yeah.
But when the Mets are thinking about big spending, age is a huge factor. And having Yamamoto at 25, not even in his prime yet, and genuinely not being hyperbolic at all, one of the better pitchers in NPB history in Japan, winning 3 straight Sawamura Awards, which is the equivalent of the Cy Young over in Japan. So he's won 3 in a row, won the Triple Crown over there. It's a 5 or 6 pitch mix. It's fastball, mid-90s. He touched 99 in the Japan series. It's a splitter, not quite a ghost fork like Senga, but a plus splitter, quality curveball, the yo-yo curve that we have talked about. Has a cutter. He's mixing in different pitches and different looks. He is a modern day pitcher with great extension, which is it makes things look faster. He's closer to the plate. So despite being on the shorter side of only 5'10", he has great extension, which kind of adds a layer to his stuff. And teams are drooling over the opportunity to get Yoshinobu Yamamoto, to the point that I believe the bidding for him starts at $200 million. I think that's where it starts. I don't think that's necessarily where it ends. I don't think he's going to get upwards of 250 million, but I think it's going to come in north of 200 million. And I think he is going to be the Mets' top priority this offseason. And I think he will probably, unless a team like San Francisco or the Dodgers miss on Ohtani, so they just throw all their chips in the Yamamoto basket, I think the Mets will probably be the high bidder for him. And he might have to turn down money to go somewhere else. And would he do that after the Mets certainly showed the ability to help a guy like Kodai Senga translate? And when you meet with him, you really want to pitch similar to how they did to Senga. You want Jeremy Hefner and Eric Yeagers in the room. You know, they have TrackMan and they have Rapsodo data. They have everything on every pitch that Yamamoto has thrown basically over the last handful of years. And they could say, you're fantastic, but we can do this and this and this to make you even better if you come here. So that's where the Mets are going to have the advantage, not necessarily over all teams. There's other teams that are going to pitch the same thing, but those teams also don't have Steve Cohen's wallet. And a lot of those teams don't have the same level of need that the Mets have. Everybody needs pitching. The Mets need pitching because they have 2 guys in the rotation, essentially, with all due respect to Tyler McGill and Joey Lucchesi and Jose Butto, who would currently be your 3, 4, and 5 starters if you started a season today. So I expect high aggressiveness from the Mets and baseball with Yamamoto, and I suspect he will get the second biggest contract of any free agent this offseason behind Ohtani.
So we know the Yankees will be a team that oh, by the way, this is a little bit breaking in the middle of this. Before I get back to Yamamoto, the Mets have announced outfield prospect Alex Ramirez has been added to the 40-man roster, so that'll protect him from the Rule 5 draft. I know during the mailbag, Joe, we are going to talk Rule 5 draft, so we'll expand on that, but I kind of want to do the update now because I know you said in the beginning of the show, by the time people are listening to this, we might not have known who the Mets are going to protect. So we will definitely get into that today as well, but that's just a clarifier. Continuing the Yamamoto conversation, a really unique storyline in baseball right now, Joe, is one of the teams, Some people project the Yankees as the favorite to land Yamamoto. We'll see. I'm just saying. Some people project them as the favorite. Brian Cashman, the Yankees GM, said this about Giancarlo Stanton. He's going to wind up getting hurt again, more likely than not, because it seems to be part of his game. In which Giancarlo Stanton's agent, Joel Wolfe, responded saying, I read the context of the entire interview. I think it's a good reminder for all free agents considering signing in New York, both foreign and domestic, that to play for that team, you've got to be made of Teflon, both mentally and physically, because you could never let your guard down even in the offseason. Why does this matter? You might be asking as you're listening to this. Joel Wolfe, who just said that, is the agent of not only Edwin Diaz, did some business with the Mets recently, not only Kodai Senga, did some business with the Mets recently, but Yoshinobu Yamamoto. He is the agent of Yamamoto. These things could be repaired. The Yankees could end up offering the most money, the best opportunity, whatever it may be. But boy, Joe, that is an interesting stick of dynamite in a relationship that you do not need damage on right now.
Brian Cashman is unhinged.
Yeah.
Like he's been going a lot of honesty, but he's been going off over the last week or so. But
very
certainly
defensive.
So this is not a positive for the Yankees if Yoshinobu Yamamoto is someone that they are interested in bringing into their organization. Though I think they need offense much more than they need a pitcher of Yamamoto's caliber. And I don't think the Yankees are willing to operate on a Steve Cohen-like budget. We'll see what it means. Ultimately, I think the Yankees could still land him. But I would say starting kind of a public war with an agent of a player currently on your team in Giancarlo Stanton.
Highly paid.
And also an agent for a player that you potentially covet seems ill-advised, but I guess we'll see how it shakes out for the Yankees. And maybe this is a good thing for the Mets. Maybe this deters Yamamoto from the Yankee side of things, because Joel Wolfe could say, look how great the Mets have treated Edwin Diaz. Look how great the Mets have treated Kodai Senga. And you could get the money in New York. Maybe it helps shift Yamamoto a little bit the Mets' way.
Something to keep an eye on. A story that's not going away until the Yamamoto sweepstakes comes to a conclusion. All right, Joe, let's dive into the key mailbag question I've kind of been teasing throughout this show. This is from JP118. He said, please explain the Rule 5 draft. I get the general idea of it, but would like more details. Thanks. And I picked this out, Joe, because honestly, I would say 40% of your mentions over the last 48 hours have been questions regarding the 40-man, the Rule 5 draft, this entire process. It's something we have talked about on the show in the past, but it's good for a refresher. We know that Alex Ramirez, a prospect in the Mets system, coming off a down year, but once upon a time was highly regarded, is now protected. They put him on the 40-man roster. Just give the big picture of the Rule 5 draft and how teams essentially prepare and go into this.
So you prepare for the Rule 5 draft. There's basically every player that you acquire, whether that's through a draft or international free agency, after a certain period of time that they are in your organization, you have to decide if they are going to be protected on your 40-man roster, or you leave them susceptible to be taken in the Rule 5 draft. And if they are taken in the Rule 5 draft, basically what that means is, say the Mets, they protected Alex Ramirez, so we'll just use him as an example. Say the Mets did not protect Alex Ramirez and they left him eligible. The Oakland A's could draft Alex Ramirez in the Rule 5 draft, and they have to carry him on their major league roster for the entirety of the 2024 season. And if they do not, if they want to try to option him, they have to offer him back to the Mets. And I expect that there's going to be a lot of conversation over the next 3 or 4 weeks about the prospects that the Mets did not protect. And if there's fear that another team's going to take them, I'm going to say it. Chances are we're going to have a lot of conversation about something that probably won't happen. And I think where the Mets stand from a 40-man roster standpoint, after adding Alex Ramirez and losing Penn Murphy on waivers, the 40-man roster stands at 33. So depending on the moves that the Mets make over the next couple weeks, they're going to be picking high in the Rule 5 draft. And they took a shot on a kid, Zach Green, last year that they drafted from the Yankees. It didn't work out. I would wager that the Mets would probably take somebody in the Rule 5 draft to have an arm or somebody to bring to camp in spring training and have compete for a job, because it's the opportunity to get a potential major league contributor at the cost of $50,000, I believe it is what you pay to draft someone in the Rule 5 draft. So that's like big picture of how it all works. And the Mets are leaving quite a few people susceptible to the draft.
Yeah, they are. A couple names here. I mean, Justin Jarvis, who we know was the return from the Brewers in the Marcana deal. And I think David Stearns will have an idea about Justin Jarvis. Call me crazy. Coleman Crowe, Juander Suarez, Jeremiah Jackson was in the trade back, with the Angels. Dominic Leone. Jeremiah Jackson hit a couple big home runs down in the Double-A team this year. So they'll all be exposed to the Rule 5 draft on December 6th. And, one thing with Ramirez, Joe, I'll say this, and I thought you had a lot of interesting points on Twitter at PSL The Flushing, if you want to go read those. I do agree, like, it's really easy to be low on him. I wouldn't have panicked if they didn't protect him, but he's still 20, and this is probably recency bias for me, and you have a much better handle on this than me. After riding the Ronnie Mauricio roller coaster as a prospect, I'll never completely quit on a 20-year-old that has flashed immense traits and tools. And let's see if he could bounce back. And if not, it is what it is. But you wouldn't want to do the old, dang, we lost him, and he reverted back to 2022 version, and now he's ascending back up the minor league tracks again.
You want to get right back on that roller coaster. You're ready to go. Buckle
arms
Connor
up
in.
and everything, dude.
Yeah, he's ready for the Alex Ramirez roller coaster. But look, I personally would not have protected anybody. To be fully transparent, I would have taken.
But explain
the chance
your logic, though. It wasn't like you don't care about the players. It's a strategy thing.
It's all a strategy thing. 40-man roster spots are very valuable, and David Stearns especially finds 40-man roster spots valuable. And when you look at a guy like Alex Ramirez, as high as I was on him last year, like, you could go back and listen, and I'll say what I said again. Like, I thought he was going to ascend to be a top 25 prospect in the sport, and he took a massive step back. He posted a 620 something OPS in high A, repeating high A.
For real.
So, like, it was a tough year for Alex Ramirez. So my thought process was, as talented as he is, he's probably not going to be among the top 10 in the Mets system when I do an update here this winter. He's certainly not in any conversation for top 100 in the sport. I just thought the odds were just so low that someone would draft him and carry him for the entire season. But obviously the Mets see something way beyond what I see, and they think that he is a bounce back candidate, and they want to keep him on the 40. He doesn't have to be on the Mets big league roster, obviously. He just is now protected, and there's no risk to losing him. The only thing that'll potentially bite them is if down the road they need to clear a 40-man roster spot and they want to, like, Alex Ramirez is the bottom of the 40-man roster. Are you putting him on waivers where a team can claim him?
I don't think
and not have to carry him on their big league roster? They could claim him and throw him in the minors.
Yeah, you can't do that. You'll lose him.
Or you're cutting a more valuable player that's higher on your board of top 40 players on the 40-man roster. So there's some risk in it. I guess I understand, but if I were in the shoes, which is very easy for me to say, I would have taken my chance with everybody that was eligible for the Rule 5 draft. But good for Alex Ramirez. It's a good thing for him to be on the 40-man roster, and we'll get a look at him at big league spring training due to that. And he has the opportunity in 2024 to, like you said, Connor, regain that prospect status. He's only 20 years old. He's not done as a prospect. It just was not a good year for him.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You could watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast. Buckle up, everyone. We're not going anywhere. We are back every single week, and the offseason is just kicking off. The player acquisitions, the movement, all the drama and rumors on the way. Thanks so much, everyone. Catch you next week.